thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. And the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Normally I have so much information to share within my PowerPoint that I feel a bit rushed. I don't, so that I like it. I can really slow down and talk about this. I can tell you who I am first, and I think this was appropriate labeled the Power of a Mother's Prayer. By the time I'm done, I hope I've conveyed that properly so you understand why. This is my wife and 3 children. I've been married 24 years. I live in Fort Worth, Texas. I didn't grow up in Texas. That's where my wife is from. My kids are way bigger than this now. They're all taller than my wife. But I used to change a picture 2 days ago. I was in California, and I asked my wife right before a presentation, I said, you want me to change the picture? She said, no. She said, I like it. They're cuter than they're a lot nicer. So as you know, when the kids get older, they're not quite as sweet sometimes. But I wish I had 10. She got cut off after 3. She had 3 C-sections. I didn't know my Catholic faith back then. And the doctor said we can have no more because she had 3 C-sections. I found out that's baloney, but I wish I'd have known that. I'd have 8 or 9 right now. This is the family I grew up in. I'm one of 6. There was 5 boys. My younger brother wasn't born yet, but I thought that picture was most appropriate for this talk. I'm the guy, the short little guy in the middle, not paying attention as always. I do think this proverb rings true that if you train up a child in the way he should go, I think when he's older, he'll come back. Some of you are going, it's not true. I'm 80. He's not back. That's okay. It may be when you're dead, when they do come back, physically speaking. I have been traveling for 13 years. I'll explain tonight how that came to be. And so I've met with lots and lots of people. And I think the harder they fall, the harder they come back. That's what I think. At least that was my experience. This is me. I don't put that up there to be cute, but I do like my pants. They're red. They go with that was my first communion. I went to a church called Sacred Heart. It's a small church in New Carlisle, Ohio, 5,000 people. Everybody knew everybody. We went to church every week because we had to. I grew up in a very structured family. We knew where we sat. We ate at 5:30 or we got our heads cut off. It was a structured, wonderful family. My dad was the hammer. My mom was the softie. And but the reason I keep that up there is because the church I went to, as you can see, is called Sacred Heart. And when I do the longer version, and it's not 2.5 hours straight, but I promise you I've been doing it 13 years. It'd be the fastest 2.5 hours you've ever had in your life. And I'll go an hour, I'll take a break, and then I'll go another hour. And I've had countless people say, could you talk another 20 minutes? Not because of me. The information I have to share is just that powerful. Do not miss the longer version if you can help it. But everything I talk about has to do with the Sacred Heart. So I think it's providential that I went to a church on my first communion called Sacred Heart. And in fact, we're in a quote unquote Eucharistic revival. A bigger miracle than everything you see out there on the tables is the fact that I'm up here talking about the Catholic faith. I assure you of that. My old friends from college can't believe it. This is me. This is my feast day, Ohio State, Michigan football. That's me in the jean jacket. That's a bar. It's called Papa Joe's. It burnt down in the 90s. They sold more beer per square foot than any bar in the 1980s. That's a true story. This bar is famous back in the day for anybody who went to college, 70s, 80s, and early 90s. If you ever went to High Street, Ohio State, you had to go to this famous little dive bar called Papa Joe's. And it's interesting because I did not grow up smoking marijuana. Not that I was an angel child by any means, but, we drank outside the house, and for whatever reason, I grew up, and it was kind of out of sight, out of mind. As long as we did what we were supposed to, Dad didn't pry too much. If I came home with a black eye, he said, what'd you do far off the bar stool, And so, but in that bar, something interesting happened to me. And we drank and we drank and we drank and we drank. That bucket cost $5. That red bucket you see there costs $5. And you get 10 of us. I don't know what's 10 and $5. 50, it's 50 cents. Is that what it is? So we didn't need a lot of money. And they fed you. They gave you free peanuts. So we just had peanuts and beer all night. They had a thing called Kegs and Eggs. I'll never forget it. It was Michigan weekend. And they called it Kegs and Eggs. I never saw an egg my whole life. I don't know if they had them or not, but they called it Kegs and Eggs. The bar closed at 2 and opened back up at 3 a.m. There was a line around the bar for people to get back in. We couldn't wait. We were already drunk. And what would happen is, and I'm just going to talk real, I hope that's okay. And what would happen is my buddy who was the DJ, he's very famous back then. His name's Dante Scuderi. Now he owns a car lot there in Columbus. He's from New York, but he was the DJ, man. He was getting it revved up. So around 3 o'clock, here he came down the street with a big straw dummy of Michigan burning, and everybody be going nuts. We'd come in by 9 or 10. We'd be soaked with beer because people just threw buckets on each other. They'd be playing the fight song by 10 or 11. There'd be a couple fights, lots of debauchery, and we'd go home and puke. The men would change their sweatshirt and go back. The women would at least take a shower. And we go back and we go back and back and back. It was complete debauchery. And I know that's not unusual for different colleges. I say that because, I was in the Air National Guard. That's how I paid for college. And so once a month, I went home to New Carlisle, Ohio with mom and dad. And when I went home, I had to go to mass, right? I say had to, right? And when I went to mass, what would I do? No, I wish I could sleep. Now, I'd receive communion, right? Of course I would. Now, to my recollection, I'm not making this up. It may be different places, but I got 5 brothers. I have since called my brother Mike, Paul, Phil, and I said, hey, man, tell me if I'm forgetting something. I don't have the greatest memory, but just tell me. I don't remember ever going to confession after the first confession. Now, we might have, but my brother says, no, we didn't. So I didn't think so. So just keep that in mind, those of you who are here. I know you're faithful about your treatment. By the way, let me say this. I have zero doubt that in this little room, I'm going to be preaching to the choir. But I guarantee you got kids and grandkids that are not in the choir. And that's a big heart of mine. So we'll talk about that briefly. I'll talk about that big time tomorrow. All right. So what happened is I went down to Texas. I met my wife in a bar. My wife used to wear stuff to the bar you wouldn't wear to the beach, if you know what I mean. You understand what I mean? My wife was a single child. I say, only child. Her parents divorced when she was 4. Her dad, who I'm friends with now, was a womanizer and a drunk. He admits it. He's a good old boy. You don't get more good old boy than her daddy. Now we have fun listening to country music together. So she made a decision at an early age. Her mom worked at Tom Thumb. I don't think they have them here. It's like a Kroger. And she worked in the meat department as a butcher. Her mom's a tough lady. And she took care of her. And so my wife made a decision early on that she didn't need a man. I think she still feels that way. She's strong. I mean, real strong. When I was 24, I was trying to figure out how to pay my bills. When she was 24, she had already built her own house. She had a modeling company. She was flying to LA every weekend. She wanted to have a talk show. She was on her way and she broke her neck. True story. When I got to know her, she was wearing a little cast in her neck. So I went down to we decided we were going to get married at some point. And I went down to the cathedral down in Dallas, Texas. And I said, we want to get married. He said, you have to sign a piece of paper that says you'll raise your kids Catholic. And I said, I don't think I'll do that because I don't even know. And I'm pretty straightforward. That's the only good thing you'll get is I'm going to tell you straight as it is. And he said, well, why, do you guys go to church? No. Why are you going to get married in a Catholic church? Because I'm Catholic. He said, you're not a practicing Catholic. Okay. And so we got married outside the church. My dad said, we're not going to go to that. It's not a real wedding. It's not a valid marriage. I thought that was crazy. Crazy. But I respected it. Now, I found out later my dad didn't want to go, but my mom talked him into it. I told you, my mom's a softie. So we went to Lake Tahoe. I found this picture, and I'll talk about briefly tonight, more tomorrow about my mom, how she died. But this is back, there's my mom. You don't see her face, but you see what she always did, was pray. When she died, I found out years later from the quote-unquote prayer ladies at Sacred Heart. I was doing a talk around 2012 or so, and some sweet lady came up to me and said, hey, I was in your mom's prayer group. And she said, when she died, we had a vote, and she was voted most likely to be a saint. I'll just give you a picture. That's my mom. Many of you are like that, right? She wore the scapulars, the rosaries. We loved mom. We thought she was too religious. Is there more to life than church? That's what we say, Mom. There's more to life than church. But I found this picture. This is in Lake Tahoe. 3 days after I got married, we stayed for a little fun. And there's my mom sneaking over to the church. And it happened to be on a feast day. That's the Feast of the Assumption of Our Lady. 1999. Now, my mom, I have at my house, I have all these prayer journals that my mom had that she kept when she was alive. I have a book, it's called Letters from Mom. So I know exactly what Mom was praying about. Everybody's ever met in their life, right? When we had the funeral for Mom, I remember people came up from all over and they'd tell my brothers, I was thinking about an abortion. Your mom gave me a prayer card. How could she know? And we'd all say the same thing. That's Mom. Somehow, some way, she had the right time. She gave us the right thing, right? Well, one of the things she was praying about is I was going to church. Now, you might think she was excited. She wasn't, because this is the church called Fellowship Church in Grapevine, Texas. We got invited to that. Does that look like this church? My wife had a theater background. She thought it was great. I wasn't against it. I couldn't believe it was church. At one time, my son, who's now 23, my wife didn't want to be Catholic, which we'll explain. And my son, I said, well, to keep my marriage intact, we'll go to both. I'll explain how I got back to the church. I was going to the Catholic church and the Fellowship church. And my son would say, are we going to the fun church or the boring church? Today, he prefers Latin only. Today, he won't use a kneeler. Today, the last thing he'd ever do is step into a place that it's all entertainment oriented. Let's put it that way. By the way, if you're not all Catholic, I'm not here to offend you. I by no means think if someone's not Catholic, they're a bad person or anything like that. So what happens, I called my mom. I said, Mom, I'm going to church. She said, did they have a mass? Now, to show you how ignorant I was, I said, let me look into it. That's a true story. I don't even know that language. You have to understand. I didn't go to Catholic school. I didn't pay attention to all this stuff. All I know is you had to get up here, and pretty soon it was done, and you can go play baseball. That's all I knew. So I found out real quickly they didn't believe that Jesus Christ was really present in the Holy Eucharist, right? And so my mom introduced me to this guy. Do you know who this is? No. How many of you know who it is? Wow. How many of you don't know who it is? Y'all got to do one thing. You need to tune into this, especially if you have kids and grandkids away from the church. This guy was a Protestant pastor. And every night on Monday night, he has a show. Now his son has since taken over. Funny, I just ran into his son. I told him this story. And so I want to show you something real quick. It's my mom. She emailed in. I was studying. She asked me, I only want you to know what you're giving up. Now, I was a football guy, not a Bible guy. So I said, okay. And so she sent me on a VCR tape all of these people who were converting to the church. And in this show, it's an hour long. You can email, you can call, you can ask questions. How do I get my son back? Yeah. So here's a question that was actually answered from my mom. My mother's name is Patricia Ann Francis. She goes by Pat Francis. You'll hear him say, here's a question from Pat Francis. This was in about 2001. I found this years later.
All right, let's take our next email. It comes from Pat Francis. I'm not sure how to characterize my question. I appreciate your time with all my questions. My son is studying the church, and I really don't like him relying on me for all his answers. He asked why we need theologians. Doesn't Jesus want things to be simple? I answered that things have changed since the time of Jesus, and we need people who study and the authority to find answers to questions that come up. Is there more I could have said?
Well,
theologians.
Yeah. Us and lawyers, right?
Blessings and curses in a sense.
Lawyers and theologians.
He says a lot more, but just to show you, that's where I was. This is me, and how many of you know who Father Mitch Pacwa is? If you don't, back then, that was in 2001, he spoke 12 languages, all ancient languages. I don't think there's anybody in the United States that knows more about theology in the church and history and Bible than Father Mitch Pacwa. He's at my house. That guy he's carrying right there, that's my firstborn son. He could carry Father Mitch right now. He's now 6'3" and 280. Why is he at my house? Because I'm hosting debates between Catholic priests and Protestant pastors. Because I wanted to hear both sides. It'd be like if you were trying to figure out politics. You go, you guys talk over my head. Let's keep it short and simple. You tell me this, you tell me this, and that's what I did. So I learned my faith by listening to debates. I don't mean this arrogantly, but I don't think you could find anybody I've never met that knew more about Catholic apologetics and Protestant apologetics than me, only because that's how I learned my faith. I didn't want to hear just who Scott hung. You know what I'm saying? I want to hear the other side. I've done that for over 20 years. So I decided the Catholic Church won the day. Guess who wasn't excited about that? My wife. It wasn't theological. It was relational. She loved those friends we had in that independent church. So you got to understand, we went from the bar scene to the Bible scene. Is this on? Okay, cool. So we went from the bar scene to the Bible scene. So my wife loved it. It was confusing to me. I knew all the biblical and historical reasons why a person should be Catholic. But when I went to the Catholic Church, not to offend you, it was like I remembered. People came late and left early. At that big mega church, they came early and left late. In 2001, I couldn't find a Bible study in the Catholic Church. They had 15 of them going on. All they wanted to talk about is getting people saved. That might turn you off, but I thought, well, at least they're really serious about this Jesus business. And I was confused. Like, if this is true, what am I mean? If Jesus Christ is really on the altar at every Mass, and that if the idea of worship is receiving Jesus' body and blood, then why isn't there a line out the door? That's what I thought. So something else happened. It always goes back to my mom. Mom sent me this tape. I didn't go to Catholic school. I've never, ever, ever heard about a stigmata. By the way, I'm not asking you to raise your hands. As far as I know, they don't pay me to be here. I just want to know, I got a short window, who I'm speaking to. So play with me, if you will. How many of you are not familiar with what a stigmata is? Raise your hand so I can see. Hi, so I can see. Only a handful. Good. You're like me. I never heard of it. It's where people experience the wounds of Jesus Christ, and it's considered a gift. Now, I ain't got a whole bunch of time to go into the gift part. I will tomorrow. So my mom said that this was on Fox. You can watch it all. Signs from God, Science Test Faith. 28 million people witness this. Nothing like this has ever been filmed in human history. Did you hear me? Nothing like this has ever been filmed. You might be wondering how you've never heard of it. My answer is because there hadn't been a movie. Okay? And we're changing that in 2025. We got a major motion picture coming out. So my mom sent me this tape, and this is the thing on the tape that caught my attention. I'm going to show it to you. Don't get overly freaked out by it, and we'll come back up.
Jesus is said to have started to carry the cross at midday and died at 3 p.m. So those were the hours we were watching for. It's 12 noon, and Katia is feeling the pain that she believes is the beginning of the stigmata. I check Katia for any visible signs, but there is nothing.
So these are scars from previous stigmata. There's nothing fresh.
As the minutes pass, her pain appears to intensify. Is the stigmata really about to show itself? Katia's spiritual advisor, Father Renzo Cecilo, is by Katia's side. He notices that her forehead has begun to bleed from tiny wounds, which would be consistent with the crown of thorns.
She feels it's burning.
Bless you, Katia. Excuse me. It's 12:15. The first mark of the stigmata on the hand is now appearing.
A tiny cross has appeared on Katia's hand.
Descendió a los infiernos y al tercer día resucitó de entre los muertos. Subió a los cielos y está sentado en la tentación y líbranos del mal. Amén.
Wounds now appear on Katia's feet. They start to bleed. Father Renzo intensifies his praying.
Dios te salve María, llena eres de gracia, Señor es contigo.
As carefully as I can, I take the samples we need for our blood tests.
Santa María, Madre.
I'm still learning all this stuff. All right, can you hear me? I don't feel like you can, but okay, good. There's a whole lot more on that. You can see the full 17 minutes of the 2-hour documentary that my mom sent me set on my website. She suffered for 3 hours. The next day, they were completely healed. The man that was filming her or sitting with her, how many of you remember Mike Wallace from 60 Minutes? That's who he is in Australia, famous household name. He hated the Catholic Church. He didn't believe in God. He was drug into this research project. Here's what happened to me. My mom sent that to me. I wasn't going to Catholic church yet. It was around the same time I'm doing all the studying. And all I thought was, Wow. That's supernatural proof that Jesus Christ is not a made-up Santa Claus story. That's how I felt. See, you believe this stuff because you were told it. But you couldn't tell me why you believe what you believe, most people. You couldn't give me the historical facts. The young people want the facts. My dad, who's 88, he don't need all the facts. He believes. You follow what I'm saying? That's not the younger generation. You can't send your kids off to college and they come back and don't believe and be shocked. They want proof. They want evidence. That's the generation we're in, right? So I'm like, okay, wow. I have two questions. Is that real? If it is real, what does it mean? Like, why would God even want or allow it? I used to go to people's house and put it in their VCR tape. It didn't matter if they were atheist, Buddhist, Catholic, I didn't care. It would be like somebody sent you a tape of Bigfoot. I just was like, check this out. And everybody say the same thing. Wow. Is that real? I don't know. I called Fox. Hey, I want the whole, it's not our, you can't, there's no website, there's no book. I literally lost the tape. My mother died. We'll talk about it in a bit. And literally 10 years after my mom sent it to me, some guy calls me, some guy I used to party with. And he called me and said, hey, man, I was cleaning out my house, Tim, and you left the tape there. And I got there with my mom's tape. And I said, this 2009. It launched in 2007. This book was officially launched by the head of Catholic Adult Education. I don't care if you got 5,000 books from every speaker and every conversion story and every dynamic Catholic. If you've never read this book, I didn't write it for 10 years. I never made a red cent off it. You need to have this book. You need to have one for all your kids, period, the end. I assure you of that. And so I got a hold of the guy who wrote it because I got online. I said, told him the whole story about my mom. I said, man, I've always wanted to know what that stigmata was all about. And this said, it not only was going to tell me that, it was going to tell me about the Eucharistic miracle. Man, this guy was talking about this before nobody talked about it. Not a word. In 2009, not one person was talking about Eucharist. I mean, there might be two, right? Nobody. This is the horse's mouth, man. He studied a couple of these things, right? I never heard of this stuff. I never heard of the stigmata. When I read that book, I learned everything. And most importantly, I got on this lady that had the stigmata. Now, I spent about 5 hours with her, 2011 or so. I wanted to meet her. I wanted to meet the guy. I brought that guy, the Mike Wallace guy, I brought him to Ohio in 2009. And they said she was getting messages from Jesus Christ and Mary. I'm like, what? How could I prove that one? So I want you to hear, this guy used to be an atheist. He became a devout Catholic because of her, okay? I want you to hear what he has to say about her messages right quick.
In a process of recuperation that he couldn't explain.
It was after getting a sign like he wanted, the dramatic appearance and disappearance of Cartier's stigmata, that Dr. Castanon began to study closely Cartier's numerous messages.
This lady didn't finish high school. And she has written in less than 3 years, 8 books, big like these books. In 2 weeks, she has written by hand 900 pages. The content talks about theology, sociology, human life, divine spirituality. When you see that this lady has not a culture, she never have written anything. And she comes with books, 200, 300, 400 pages. And there is no a theological mistake. She says, Jesus will dictate me. And she gets a tachycardia. It means that the heart begins to beat very fast. And she said always, when Jesus will tell me something, I have this feeling. And I have touched her heart in this moment. And really she has a tachycardia. And she begins to write. I see that the person does not stop. She writes continuously all the time. She has not a moment to stop and think about. If you write a letter to your friend, you take your time and sometimes you stop, and she doesn't know. She writes continuously all the time. I would say that altogether she could print 4,000 or 5,000 pages, intelligent pages, poetic pages, theology, philosophy, sociology, politics, critique.
They filmed her writing for an hour straight without pausing one time. She never finished 7th grade. She writes in Latin, Greek, Polish, and Italian. She doesn't know the languages. Her bishop made her his executive secretary of the Marian Eucharistic Congress. They started an entire apostolate in the Catholic Church called the Apostolate for the New Evangelization. And Jesus Christ told her, I've never given anybody more in the Eucharist than you. So you can imagine when I started reading those booklets, first I found out it was real. Oh my gosh, it's real. Then I found out about stuff y'all know about, like Padre Pio. I didn't know about Padre Pio. I didn't know about all these kind of people that had been, St. Catherine of Siena, the Stigmata, the Messages, St. Faustina. I didn't know about this. I learned all about that reading that book. I called my brothers Mike, Paul, Phil. I said, everything Mom believes is real. Jesus said this, it's called, a little book called The Passion. He said, when those filthy and repugnant hands dealt me blows and slaps, I saw how often I'd be struck and slapped by so many souls who, without purifying themselves of their sins, without cleaning their house with a good confession, would receive me in their hearts. When I read that, I thought back to college. I thought going to Mass, receiving communion. I thought about how much horrific stuff I had on my soul. I had been in confession for 10 years. Jesus said this to this lady, talk to the world about sacramental confession, the source of saving water that awaits everybody. And whoever is immersed in this water will be protected from the enemies of the soul. I found out there's 3 enemies of the soul. People say, one thing I forgot to tell you because my mind goes 50 different ways, is when I was in that bar, the owner took me in the basement. I was a bouncer. And he was buying cocaine. I'd never seen it in my life. And the first time, the one guy said, would you like some? I said, no, thank you. The second time, I said, sure. Cocaine eventually led to crack. At one point, and this is even after my mom died, I went to a high school or a college, a guy from college's wedding. I flew to Texas back to Ohio with my old college buddies. And of course, what are we doing at the wedding? Drinking. And next thing you know, the next day I was supposed to have a family reunion with my brothers and everybody, which I cherish like you can't believe because Mom passed. And I didn't show up because it only takes a few drinks for an addict. Now I say that because, you know, drugs, if you have kids or grandkids that have messed their lives up, drugs don't care who you are. Lawrence Taylor used to smoke crack before he went back out for the second half. One of the greatest linebackers of all time. And so it tore my life up. And my brother picked me up he found me 2 days later. And he drugged me to my mom's gravesite. He just drove me right there because he said, I didn't know what else to do. So people ask me, how'd you get away from your addictions? And I said, the sacraments of the Catholic Church. So she says, the enemies of the soul, you have 3 enemies, the world, the flesh, and the devil. People say, I can't understand it. I'm shocked. We raised our kids in the Catholic school. We raised them right. We went off to college. That was it. And I say, I'm shocked that you're shocked. How could you be shocked? Could you imagine throwing your kid into a river and going, I don't know why they're going upstream or downstream. They're going to go with the current. When I grew up, we watched Little House on the Prairie. What was Little House on the Prairie selling? Virtue, honesty, integrity. Right? What do you think the world's selling when you turn the TV on now? Vice. Of course they're going to go that way, but have great hope. There's this little booklet that you're going to get. I don't know if I'll tell you about it briefly today, but Jesus gave it to this lady called Live the Holy Mass. It is, Mass will be so different or even more profound for you after reading this little booklet. That's all I can tell you. My dad retired from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base early. My mom stayed home and took care of the kids. And about several years before my younger brother was out of the house, my mom went and got a job. And she didn't have to. My dad's from the old school. He grew up 11 kids on a farm in Russia, Ohio. He never wasted money. We didn't eat out when we grew up. We ate roasted potatoes 4 nights a week at 5:30. I didn't get the new leather Nike Air Jordans. I got the canvas cheap ones. I was lucky to have those. My dad has the same clothes today as when I was little because he don't care about that crap. I love that about him now. You understand? Dad's 88. So my dad was going to spend money. For us, it was a big deal. He wanted to travel. He retired early. My mom went and got a job. It drove him nuts. He used to tell me, ask Mom when she's going to retire. So finally, after 15 years, she retired as a secretary for the local school. And he rented an apartment for 3 months down in Florida. For us, it was a big deal. We didn't grow up going to Clearwater Beach and Disney World. We went to the local campground and we went fishing. That was what we loved. So Dad was going to go spend some money. Mom said, I'll go to Florida with you on 2 conditions. One is you have to have a cell phone. Now, that was the early 2000s. My dad didn't have a cell phone, right? He barely wants one today. And 2 is we have to be by a Catholic church. So I got a call that nobody wants to get from my brother Paul. I was in Texas. I'll never forget it. He was in Ohio. He said, man, you need to get your tail to Georgia. They were going from Ohio to Florida. And while they were in Georgia, Mom had a massive heart attack while he was driving. And my dad didn't know what to do. He jumped out, tried to wave people down, eventually called 911. He kind of had a little guilt, thought he took too long. So Paul said, hey, Tim, you need to get here because Mom's in a coma. They don't think she's going to make it through the night. So I rushed in there, as anybody would. My dad, I never saw my dad cry my whole life. He didn't have time for tears. That was the kind of dad he is. And I remember seeing my dad just brokenhearted, and we're sitting there praying and praying and praying. And I'm thinking, boy, she's going to make it because, this is what she wanted. So, us to pray the rosary together, my gosh. She died on January 19th, 2004. I watched my mom take her last breath. Here's what blew me away. My mom always kept all my stuff because I always lost stuff. If you have kids like that, just give it to me. So I went to my mom's house and I was going through all the records, all her letters. She used to keep it on the little floppy disk, And I found my baptism when I was a little baby. And I was baptized on January 19th. And that's when she died. And I thought about the 7 sacraments. I thought there's something beautiful about that. There's not one day that my dad didn't go to that graveyard. My mom used to watch EWTN. My dad would watch CNN and Fox. Today, my dad watches every time I talk to him. What are you watching, Dad? EWTN. I remember getting that little thing called Making Sense Out of Suffering. Now, when I say why do bad things happen to good people, I'm not talking about my mom. My mom was one of those that was ready to go, if you know what I mean. She lived and breathed the faith. Dad's a good man, him too. I remember going back to my dad's house, and I spent about a week there. So if you can get this picture, here's my dad. They've been married 39 years at the time, and they'd retired. He's going to go down to Florida, 3 months. Next thing you know, Mom has a heart attack. We spent a couple weeks in the hospital. I literally slept in the hospital with Dad. She dies, we bury her. I go back to that little town, New Carlisle, and I'm sitting in this, what I consider empty house. And I'm just sitting there and I'm going, I know in about a week, I got to go back to Texas. And I remember going back to Texas and I cried like a baby on the airplane, thinking about my dad. My mom too, but thinking about my dad. And I remember this. I got this little CD right here. You guys have heard of this? If you haven't, there's a thing called Formed. You have it at the church, I guarantee it. You can listen to that for free. To say it was impactful, it was unbelievable. I got that CD the same time I got my mom's tape on the Stigmata, just by coincidence. Paul said, I rejoice in my sufferings for your sake, and in my flesh I complete what is lacking in Christ's suffering. I started thinking about my mom's suffering. I started thinking about that lady who had the Stigmata suffering. It's like, what's he talking about? So this guy, Paul, used to kill Christians for a living, right? He had a big conversion. He was in prison when he wrote this, getting beaten. And he said, I rejoice in my sufferings, and in my sufferings I complete what is lacking in Jesus Christ's suffering. I'm like, what is he talking about? He's talking about exactly what Jesus told the lady who had the Stigmata. Now, here's a message for any of you that will, do, and have suffered. To suffer pain and sickness patiently is to reach in advance a great part of the crown prepared for you in heaven. If a sick person complains that because of his illness he can do nothing, he's wrong. He can do everything by offering God all of his suffering with peace and acceptance. And the church says suffering in union with the passion of Christ acquires a new meaning. It becomes a participation in the saving work of Jesus. I was thinking about my mom. I remember my sister showed me, she said, Mom really likes that cassette tape. She was in a coma, we're in the hospital. I said, what is it? It said, Chaplain of Divine Mercy. Now, I don't know what you know about that, but when you read the book, you're going to find out that that's what you should be taking to people who are in the hospital or on their deathbed. You'll understand clearly. I know nothing about this. I thought it sounded beautiful. That's all. That sounds beautiful. So we were sitting there playing that by mom on a coma. I didn't know. I didn't understand that. I didn't know why we were doing it. Now I do. And I was thinking, I'll bet you anything that my mom, years later, I thought about this. I'll bet you anything my mom had a choice. I'll bet you anything the Blessed Mother gave her a choice. Stay or go. And I bet she said, keep you around for about a week because I want to offer it up because I need my kids to come back to church. You wouldn't be here right now, even beginning to hear this message. And boy, when I tell you I'm giving you the appetizer, I'm giving you a crumb. Tomorrow I'll give you an appetizer, and if you stay, I'll lead you to the main course. And if you think I'm here because to give a nice talk, man, you got it wrong. I'm here so this pebble in this pond goes way beyond these small rooms. St. Pio said, now I don't know what you know about St. Pio, but he bled a cup of blood every day for 50 years. What? How come I never heard of this? Sometime after 1970 or so, they quit talking about all this stuff. And it's just now coming back. That's the truth. He bled a cup of blood every day for 50 years. He used to sit in the confessional for 15 hours a day. I go on and on about him. He's my favorite saint. He said, when Jesus wants me to know he loves me, I thought about this. He makes me suffer the wounds, the thorns, the anguish of his passion. Jesus himself wants my suffering. He needs them for souls. I thought about my mom. I thought, wow, that maybe that was a gift. What do you mean? Maybe God's more concerned about our souls than our physical health. Maybe God cares more about our kids' souls than their 401k. This was a profound thing for me to think on. I put this up there because my mother loved Mother Angelica. Do you know who that is? There would be no Mother Angelica without this lady. When Mother Angelica was little, she had a stomach problem. This before she was Mother Angelica, who started the EWTN. Nobody could fix the stomach problem. So desperately, her mother brought her to Rhoda Wise's house in Canton, Ohio. Rhoda Wise was a Protestant who converted. And as you can see, she had the stigmata every single Friday. It's called the House of Healing. I've been there twice. If you like football, you can go to the Football Hall of Fame, and then you can sneak over to Rhoda Wise's house. But I thought about what he said. This is in 1945. This is the Monsignor. He said, in my personal judgment, she was held in high favor by God. In the midst of a sinful world, holiness is still cherished. That's 1945 in the midst of a sinful world. What would they say today? He said, Rhoda Wise was truly a holy soul with her heart filled with love of God. So great that she was able to endure the greatest suffering for his sake. And I thought about my mom. She didn't have the stigmata. And Jesus said, if one of your loved ones is far away from us, I'm not getting a text message, I'm looking at my time. If one of your loved ones is far away from us, pray for him. Give him my mother. She'll bring him in her arms to me. There's my mom. I want to show you this last bit of time I have. I want to show you how the power of a mother's hand was heavily on this. Tomorrow I'll go into more depth. I'm getting married outside the church. I'm dealing with addiction as well. Addiction never goes away completely. Anybody that says I have no desire anymore, I don't believe you. You're just not in the right situation. I know for a fact that if I personally go to a place, so if you ever hear about Tim Francis falling down, it's because I made the stupid decision to put myself in a situation, period. You talk about people who've been clean for 20 years and they fall because it's always waiting around the corner. The world, the flesh, and the devil. I'm getting married outside the church. My mother put that in the newspaper. Now, she's not happy about me getting married, but she put it in the local New Carlisle Sun paper. She sent it to me. It's laminated. It's cut out. My daughter came to me in 2013. My mom died in 2004. My daughter came to me and said, is that you and Mom? It is. I said, guess who put it in there? I said, your grandmother, who she never met, my mom. And then I flipped it over. It's laminated. And it just so happens on the back, you can't believe what it's going to say. And I thought about this. And I said, what did my mom do? Call the newspaper and say, hey, my son's getting married outside the church. He's dealing with addictions. Could you make sure on the back of it says Catholics come home? That's a secular newspaper, man. You can't make that up. I didn't see this till about 2013. I said, and see, I've been traveling for 13 years. I'll do it to the day I die, God willing. I have 2 missions. My micro mission is what I'm doing now. I usually go to parishes. I don't do talks like this, usually small talks. But I just got back from San Diego, California. And before that, I was in Florida and then Colorado. I mean, just on and on. And so I've been on a road warrior going to parish missions to wake people up with what I'll be doing tomorrow. But it really is to bring Catholics home. By the way, I don't mean just Catholics that are far away from the church. I know you think that. I'm talking about Catholics who come to Mass. You'll see what I mean if you come to my presentation. Even if you go to daily Mass, I 100% guarantee you, you're going to walk out of here going, I didn't know that. I guarantee it. Very few, only a small percentage won't. There's my mom on her knees. I'm getting married outside the church, and this show comes out. Nothing like this has ever been filmed in human history. That's a true story. My mom sent it to her wild son. It caught my attention, and you saw why. I witnessed a lady have stigmata. I wanted to find out if it was real. There's no tape. There's no website. There's no book. I lost the tape. My mother died. And 10 years after she sent it to me, some guy called me out of the blue and said, hey, man, I'm cleaning out my house. And you left the tape there. And by the way, guys don't do that. They just throw stuff out. And I got my mom's tape. So I Googled, and I found this guy who wrote the book. I got a hold of him and said, send me everything you got. That book and her little booklets, which I'll talk about shortly, and I brought him, that famous investigative journalist. 10 years before this man was on the tape my mom sent me. I didn't know him from a hill of beans, but just to understand, he's every bit as famous as Mike Wallace. Voted richest 200 people in Australia. Remember Muhammad Ali? He was going to fight Joe Frazier for the 3rd time. It was called the Thrilla in Manila back when there were 3 TV stations. There was over 1,000 credited journalists that wanted to get his time. If you Google Mike Willesee and Muhammad Ali, you'll see a young Mike Willesee who spent the entire week with Ali. That's who he was. That's who his credentials were. He died in 2019 of throat cancer. He wrote a memoir of his life. You know what he said? He said, every story I've ever done is junk. It's garbage compared to this story and what's written in that book. Amazing. I tell people I can prove to you that the Blessed Mother is behind this. Can you see her behind the thing? We didn't plan that. I've been to lots of churches. I don't see statues behind the speaking podium, even if Mary's up front where she should be. They didn't say, hey, let's come do a talk and could you film it on the Blessed Mother's birthday? That ain't how it happened. They said, I'm coming back from Bolivia. I'll be passing through the United States September 8th, 9th, and 10th. Would you like to set up a talk, Tim? That's 2009. I said, I would. I said, I'll do the first one in Ohio to honor my mom. And on the Blessed Mother's birthday, no one said a word. Then I found out this lady who had the stigmata, her first mystical experience was on September 8th, 1991 with the Blessed Mother. Why? As you know, Mary has one job, to bring people to her son. I'll tell you this quick story. We'll be done. I'll wrap it up. This happens all the time, but this is pretty significant. Lady, her name's Sharon Spillman up in Pennsylvania. She'd come to one of my talks in Philadelphia, and she told me the story that you always tell me. My brother's away from the church. He's angry with God. Why? Because his wife died of a rare illness, and he's ticked off. She said, we grew up Catholic. She said, he's super rich. Why does that matter? Because sometimes when people are super rich, they're kind of prideful. He literally builds resorts in Cozumel. It costs you $15,000 a day to stay in the resorts he builds. I said, send him a book. Mike Willesee was voted richest 200 people in Australia. He was so skeptical you couldn't believe of this story. By the way, that book reads like a James Bond movie, only it's true. By the time you're done, you're hearing about the Mass in a way nobody's ever heard of. Anyways, I said, send him the book. She called me. She said, crying almost, Tim, I'm so excited. What is it, Sharon? Not only did he read the book, he bought a case. He hands them out because he's rich. She said, and not only did he do that, he bought enough books to send to every bishop in the United States. He sent me a picture of his office filled up with books. I called him. I said, John, are you back at Mass? I am. Tell me the story. He said, let me text you. This is what he puts in the back of every book. I lost my wife to rare illness. I became angry at God, but this amazing factual book brought me back. So I'm giving these books away to help others find their way back. Please pass it on to someone to return it when finished reading so we can both help others. Somebody once told me that's called evangelization. Whatever you want to call it, I heard that the Bible says that we're supposed to be made fishers of men. And see, I grew up fishing. I know two things. One is if you're going to fish, you don't catch trout with catfish bait. And one thing that everybody's interested in, almost everybody, is the supernatural. I assure you of that, even if you're not. People say, I don't need this. I believe. You're missing the point. We're called to bring others to the faith, and you don't have to. And the second thing I learned about fishing is the more you talk, the more you scare the fish. You don't have to be a smarty pants. I don't know all this stuff. You don't have to know a word. There are so many resources that you can use to direct people, but there's an old saying. You can bring a horse to the water, but you can't make him drink. But let me tell you something. Did you hear me? You can bring a horse to the water. Did you understand? Sitting back and saying all I'm going to do is pray about is baloney, just so you know, baloney. That's not what the early church did. They did not sit back. Can you imagine Peter and Paul going, I'd love to say something, but I don't want to push them away. I don't know what world you grew up in, and I understand my dad didn't grow up evangelizing, but here's the good news. You ain't got to hold a sign up and say, repent or you're going to hell. That's a bad technique. But daggone it, if you thought anything I said today was halfway interested and I'd given you a crumb, you have a moral responsibility to make sure everybody in your contact list, I didn't say just your kids, everybody in your contact list, instead of spending time on Facebook or whatever it is, every single person in your contact list in the next 90 days should watch the 17-minute video on my website because it's my mom's video. And Jesus said, I needed to show the world my suffering. By the way, here's how you get them to watch it. You don't blast it out. Nobody reads blast stuff. We all get that stuff. You don't send a blast email or a text. You call them. Old school. You text them and say, call me. Say, I need 17 minutes of your time. Tell me when you have it. Why? I ain't telling you. I need you to be in front of a computer, not your smartphone. That's how you do it. And you get them on even if they're in Alaska, and you get them on there and you let them watch it. That's what Jesus wants. Because that was the attention grabber. Now, I looked for a book. There was no book. Now we got them. Because after somebody watches that, the chances of them reading that book go up 5,000%. What's that old saying? The curiosity killed the cat? I was the cat. That tape was the curiosity button. It took me 10 years. It don't need to take your people 10 years. You make sure you get enough books. And by the way, hear me on this. I got to end because we're going to go eat. Don't go on no website and buy these books. I don't got reasons to tell you why right now. We're getting that fixed up. I'll get them for you cheaper, and my ministry gets credit for it, so I need it. Get them through me. Now, I have, 80 of them or so that they sent here. I'll end with this. I keep saying that, but I have to tell you this. What time is it? 6:05. They're getting mad at me. I'll end with this. Give me 1 minute. Jesus said, I've never spoken so much of the Eucharist as I have through you. You are my missionary to the Eucharist. That's what you are for me. He said, you don't know how holy, how misunderstood, and how maltreated is that unique sacrament in which I give myself to you. He said, that's the reason for these books. A large part of my laity in my church are ignorant. Boy, that's an understatement. So there's 3 books on the Eucharist, and you don't have to write it down. There's 4 books on the Passion. It just so happens we're in Lent, and we're in a Eucharistic revival. This ain't by chance you got to this real room. I travel all over the United States, and here I am in South Carolina talking to you about this, and I have these 3 books and these 4 books with me. So what you want to do is you want to leave with this after we eat or tomorrow. I don't have time to tell you why you need to leave with that. I'm making a movie. It's not going to be a horror flick. It's going to be way bigger than Father Stu, way better. It ain't going to have F-bombs. And there's 3 books on the Eucharist and 4 books on the Passion. I started going to daily Mass, Holy Hour, and praying the Rosary in 2009. Why? Because of those booklets. That's why. That's why. By the way, I have a web page. If you'll remember it, you can Google it. It's not for my ministry. It's for my movie. It's called The Exorcist from Wall Street.com. It's not a horror flick. Boy, I wish I had time to tell you about it. I don't. It's a true story, and it's going to show the Catholic faith in the most bold way. And it's not going to be a B film. I'm not going to show it at a church. It's going to be at the major movie theaters, and Matt Damon's going to star in it. That's the kind of movie we're making. It's going to be big, real big. TheExorcistFromWallStreet.com. We're going to attract a whole lot of people that don't even understand what they're going for. When they're done, they're going to be Googling Stigmata, Eucharistic Miracle, Confession, Padre Pio, St. Faustina. Guarantee you that. I want to finish with 3 prayers my mom. I have a book at home that says, Mom says, these are 3 prayers you should always pray. I guess I never read her letter until years after she died. People always say, your mom must be proud of you. I work for my mom. I work for Our Lady. And I'm just giving you a crumb. In the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Jesus, to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, I offer you my prayers, works, and sufferings of this day. I offer them for all the intentions of your Sacred Heart, the intentions of the Blessed Mother, the intentions of priests and bishops, and especially the intentions of our Holy Father. Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love and trust me here, ever this day be at my side, to light, to guard, to rule and guide. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly hosts, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan, all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Karen, where are you, Karen? Okay, everyone probably knows you, but stand up real quick. I know you don't want to, but I'm speaking. Okay, so Karen, 12 years ago, if you're wondering how I got here, heard me talk, I guess, at a Lighthouse convention or something. And I was asking her, because I go so many places, I'm like, I always forget how we got connected. That's how we got connected. So if anything that I have the privilege to share with you today and tomorrow, and you think it's beneficial, which I can guarantee it's more than beneficial, not because I'm here, you can just thank Karen, because she's the one that set this whole thing up. I guess we're gonna go eat. Good deal. Thank you.